what you want. No, you can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want. But if you try sometime, you might find you get what you need.
Sir Mick once said you can't always get what you want, right? And that's true, right? You can't always get what you want, and sometimes that's frustrating, and sometimes that's painful, and sometimes it's discouraging and you just want to give up. But what I hope you hear today, and what I hope I hear today, is sometimes you don't get what you want, and it's a good thing. Can be a good thing. And when it comes to the idea of God and the realm of God, following God, believing God, there is a universal frustration that I believe every single one of us feels. Every single one of us in this room. And maybe you're not a follower of Jesus and you're just checking this whole thing out and trying to figure out, hey, is Jesus and God and Bible, what is all that? I still think you feel this frustration. And if you're new today, if this is your first time ever to be at Miami Church, you feel this frustration. And if you're a follower of Jesus, if you're seeking God, if you want to be in a relationship with God, if you're trying to figure out what it's like to live in sync with God, to live in relationship with God, you certainly feel this frustration. So here's the reality. We all have times in our lives, seasons in our lives when God feels distant. When God feels quiet, when God feels absent, when God is uncooperative. And I believe one of the most frustrating things about believing in God, one of the most frustrating things about seeking God, one of the most frustrating things about following God is when God seems to say no. Or when God says no. Nope. Not now. Remember when I was in my mid-20s, this is a couple years ago, and I was living in Chicago, and I desperately wanted to be married. And I just was longing to have companionship, to do life together with someone, and to start a family. And it was a desire of my heart, and I remember just praying and pleading. And there was a season there in my mid-20s when there was just no prospect. I mean, forget marriage. There wasn't even one I was interested in dating, right? And it was just this dry time, this dry season, right? And it's like, hey, God. Hello? Hey, God. Do you see what's happening here? Do you see me? Do you see me? Are you paying attention? Hey, I'm down here. I'm trying to do all the right things. I'm trying to live the right way and do the right thing. And you're just not cooperating. Like you're not helping me. Things are not going according to my plan. You ever feel that way? Yeah? I think we all do. You know, and I said this a couple of weeks ago, and this is so true. It doesn't help that there's guys like me, right? There's preacher types, right? And you see them, they're all over the internet and YouTube and podcasts. And there's guys like me, preachers types, and it's easy to stand up here and you get a microphone and you can just make it sound so easy. Like, oh, it's just so easy. You just need to believe. You just need to have more faith, right? And you're sitting out there and you're like, man, what's wrong with me? You start kind of feel blame. It's like, well, you just don't have enough faith, or you just don't believe, or there's some kind of sin in your life, right? And then to make it even harder, there's people, right? And you see people, and you see these people, right? And you don't even know if they pray or not, but you just see them, and it just seems like everything just goes so naturally, just so easy, like their life just falls all into place. And you're looking at their Instagram and you're like, oh my gosh, they're just, like their kids are smiling. Like, I mean, like they go out to eat and their kids just sit real still and listen and eat. And you look at them and they're smiling. Their hair is all like just perfect and they have hair, which is just amazing. And you're just like, these people are just perfect. And it just seems like it's just so easy. And God is so attentive to whatever they want. They just have, and I don't even know if they pray, but it just seems to just flow so naturally for them. And for you, God seems absent. And God seems distant. And God seems uncooperative. Like, I've got a plan here, God. You don't seem to be cooperating with my plan. God, is that a no? Did I just hear a no? Because you need a job. I mean, heck, you'll just take an interview at this point. Right? And you got stuff going on with your insurance and the bills are mounting. And your marriage is not getting any better. And your son or daughter, you just wish they would just come home. And you're not feeling any better and your health doesn't seem to be taking a turn. And there's a school thing or a job thing or a money thing. Like, what do you do? What do you do? As frustration is starting to build, doubts are starting to mount. Like, what do you do? You can't always get what you want. So what do you do? I want to, this morning, just take a couple of minutes, and I want to tell two stories. And I firmly believe that God wants to speak to some of us this morning. I've not faced more resistance in preparation for a message in a long time, and so I believe there's something that God has for me and for you. And so I'm praying that we would open our hearts and minds to because what I want to do is to briefly just tell two stories. And what's great about these stories is these are stories of people that God loved. Like, God knew their names. God knows them. He obviously cares about them. They're good people. They're trying to do good things. These are good people, two stories of good people, and for different reasons in the different stories, God seems to be uncooperative. I mean, God just literally says no, not going to happen. So here's the first story. The first story is going to come from the New Testament, what we call the Gospel of Mark. And if you're new, we've been on a journey as a church through what we're calling 50 Days with Jesus, leading to Easter. And we've been walking kind of section by section, verse by verse through Mark, heading into Easter. And so if you've been reading along, you read this. This was actually day 31. And on this day, you read in Mark 10 that there is a request made by two people who are really, really close to Jesus. It's a fascinating request, and I'm going to show it to you on the screen. This is how Mark records this based on eyewitness accounts. This is, again, Mark chapter 10, and I'll just kind of walk you through this real quick. He says this. It says, "Then James and John, okay, the sons of Zebedee, came to him," and the him here is Jesus. So they came to Jesus, and here's what they said. "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask." It's a loaded question, right? To do for us whatever we ask. Now, a little context, right, for all of us so we're all on the same page. James and John, okay, they're followers of Jesus, but they're really more than followers of Jesus. They're bros. I mean, they are close. They're as close in friendship as you can get. I mean, they are an inner circle, right? I mean, James and John is the guy that was known as the one that Jesus loved. That was like what he was known as. In fact, John, he's the guy that wrote some of the most famous words in the history of the world, right? John 3:16, "For God so loved the world that," you even know that. You may not be a church person. Like these are these people. Like these guys, Jesus clearly loves them, and he has a deep relationship with them. And so they make this crazy ask, like, whatever we want, will you give it to us? And look how Jesus responds. He says this. He says, "What do you want me to do for you?" I wish people would ask me that more often, right? I don't get that very often. What do you want me to do for you? Well, I'm glad you asked. I'm a little hungry right now. And here's what he replied. Next verse, 37. "What do you want me to do for you?" Here's what James and John said. They replied, "Let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in your glory." Now they're asking here for a place of honor. And from their perspective, right, their perspective, what they see, okay, their perspective, is they believe that Jesus, right, is going to come and overthrow the Roman Empire, and kick them out, and that Jesus is going to become the king. right? And the king, kind of in old school thinking, he's going to be the king, and they're going to have places of power, places of where they rule, and so one of them will sit on his right and the other will sit on his left, right? And that's what they're thinking. And so they're asking for this. And again, from our vantage point now, looking back in history, it's easy to go like, well, you guys were idiots. But this request shows how little they understood what Jesus was going to do. And then I love his response. This is a great response. He says this, right? Okay, you want to sit on the right, you want to sit on the left. He goes, you don't know what you're asking. You have no idea what you're asking. Can you drink the cup that I drink or be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized? Have you ever asked for something and you had really no idea what you were asking for? I mean, this ranges from silly to serious, right? Like my kids, Dad, can we have cotton candy for dinner? Like, well, you really don't know what you're asking. I mean, you can, but then like an hour later, you're going to be like, ugh, like so sick, right? Or maybe you've prayed or asked, like, God, I just want to be in a relationship with her or with him. Or God, can I just have that car? I want that job, right? And here's James and John, right? They spoke from a place of ignorance. Like Jesus is like, you don't have any idea what you're asking. See, they didn't know that Jesus is talking about suffering. They thought he was talking about like glory. They had no idea. And you see here he says, can you drink the cup? The cup here that he's talking about signified divine judgment. It's this idea that Jesus is referring to the divine judgment poured on him on behalf of all of humanity. And the word baptism here, again, these can be confusing words, but baptism is referring to the idea of a baptism of blood or an immersion of suffering. He's like, you don't know what you're asking. And look how they responded. He says, can you? And they say, oh, we can. Yeah, we can. Like, and what's funny, I guess it's not funny to them, it's funny to me now, that they both actually did suffer for following Jesus. In fact, both James and John literally gave their lives at the end for following Jesus. In fact, James, we believe through history, was the first apostle to suffer martyrdom. And he was the first king. And look what Jesus said. He says, you will drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with. But to sit at my right hand or my left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those whom they have been prepared. I remember when I was in my early 20s, I was in seminary at a school, and I took this professor. He seemed like he was a roommate of Moses at the time, but he's probably like in his 70s, and he just seemed so super old. But this guy, Jack McGorman, that was his name, and he would come into class, like we'd all be like, this was the class. He would roll into class, and I took a class on the Gospel of Mark. Okay, the entire class was just the Gospel of Mark. It was crazy. He would come rolling into class, and all he would have was this little black book. And it was the Greek New Testament. If you don't know this, the New Testament of the Bible was originally written in Greek. And he would roll into class, and he would put the Greek New Testament on the podium at the front. He would open it, and he would pray. And then he would just start reading. So he's reading Greek, and then translating it in his head and reading out loud in English. And I'm like, right? I'm sitting on the front row like, you got to be kidding me. This is what he does. And he's reading this. And by the way, this guy's the best teacher I've ever had. I took him every semester. I mean, if he was teaching, I took this guy. He was really, really hard. His tests were killer. But he was so good. And he came to this passage. He came to this Mark 10. I'll never forget. This happened years ago. I can remember this like it just happened. He comes and he's reading this passage. And he was from Canada. So he had this Canadian accent, abute, you say like abute and stuff like that. And he's reading this passage, and he gets to this place, and he reads this, you will drink the cup I drink and be bound. And I'll never forget this. He says, oh, students, Jesus in this passage is showing great restraint. Because if James and John had received what they asked for, they would have been crucified along with Jesus, one on his right and one on his left. Wow. And the class was like, crickets. I'm getting chills just telling the story. I remember sitting there like, what? How many times do we ask for stuff that we have no idea what we're asking for? And God says no. And we think he's punishing us, right? Or he's being mean. But really, he's showing restraint. He's showing great restraint. And sometimes, not always, months later, maybe years later, right, we can look back, we get perspective, and we can look back and we can go, whew, thank you, God, for saying no to that one. I had no idea what I was asking. Thank you for not cooperating. At the time I was frustrated, at the time I was angry, at the time I was ticked, at the time I didn't understand and you seemed distant and absent and uncooperative. But now looking back, this doesn't always happen, but sometimes now looking back, after all of these months or all these years, I can go, thank you, God, for not answering that prayer. I ask you, what are you asking for now? What's the desire of your heart? Would it really be a good thing if it was a yes? Maybe. Story number 2. The second story that I want to tell, and this one's very comforting to me because this is a story about someone who makes a request of God and God says no, but God really should have said yes because God had called this person to do something for him, and by saying no, that is actually hindering this guy from doing what God had called him to do. Like, so you're like, God, you should say yes because that would actually help him do what you called him to do, but you're saying no and that hinders it. That doesn't line up. But God says no. And the guy's name is Paul, and if you've been around the Bible at all, you know that one of the main characters in all the Bible is a guy named Paul. And Paul actually wrote most of the New Testament, half the New Testament. And when we first meet Paul, Paul is actually named Saul. His name is Saul, not Paul. And he's actually one that's persecuting the church. He's actually trying to, like he would bust into gatherings like this and try to put us all in jail and rough us up. And he has this encounter with Jesus on what's called the road to Damascus. And this is only 2 or 3 years after the resurrection of Jesus, he has this encounter with Jesus. And he flips, right, and goes from persecuting churches and trying to kill Christians to actually trying to help plant churches and start churches. And for 20 years, Paul gives everything he has to planting churches, to starting churches, and he travels and he goes on boats and he takes long journeys and he just does real intense ministry for 20 years. But we know that after he became a follower of Jesus, that something devastating happened to Paul. Something devastating, that he was afflicted with some type of physical ailment. There was something physically going on with Paul. And this was a big deal because it was an impediment for him. It kept him from doing what he was called to do. It hindered what he was trying to do for God. And Paul did what you would and I would have done, right? What would you do, right? If you had something or if you have something, what would you do? You would just pray, right? And Paul prayed. In fact, Paul pleaded and he asked God, he said, God, will you take this away? Will you take this physical impediment? Will you take this physical ailment? Will you take it away, please? And God says no. God says no. God says, hey, I don't care how much faith you have. I don't care how much you believe. I don't care how much you give. I don't care what you serve. I don't care how obedient you are. I don't care what you promise. I don't care what you bargain with me. The answer is no, Paul. And Paul begged for God to change it. And he did. And Paul actually recorded this. He recorded this firsthand. And so we have an insight into what Paul was feeling. And it's in what's called 2 Corinthians, which is a letter to the church in Corinth. And this is Paul. This is his own words. He says this, 2 Corinthians 12:7. Therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh. Now, some of you have used that terminology about someone and you didn't know where it came from, right? You talked about a spouse or a boss or a coworker, and you're just like, they're just a thorn in my flesh. Well, this is where you got it from. Paul actually wrote it. And he's saying, this is a thorn. It's this idea of a constant, irritating problem. There is a thorn in my flesh. Then look what he says, verse 8. He says, a messenger of Satan. Well, here we go. A messenger of Satan to torment me. Now, we can't tell from the text if this is like a literal thing or a figurative thing. You know, figuratively sometimes if you have like you take a vacation and things just go bad, like that was the vacation from hell, you know, you would say something like that. So it's kind of more of a figurative idea versus a literal. I don't know, but what he is saying is that whatever this thorn in the flesh is, it's so awful that it torments me. That's a strong word. Torment. Like every single day, there's this consistent and constant tormenting. When I stand up and when I sit down and when I try to lay down, there's this consistent and constant tormenting. And it's some kind of physical ailment. We don't know exactly what it is. And people that have studied this, and they take kind of what they think it is. And some people think it's some kind of epilepsy, and that Paul had these recurring seizures that would happen. And he just never knew. At just random times, he would have these seizures. And in that culture, that was seen as some kind of demon possession. That was bad. And other people believe that this was migraines, that Paul would just get these debilitating migraines. And I know some of you suffer with migraines. And you know when you get in that moment that you just can't even function, right? You get that. Some people think this is some form of malaria that Paul had. He had these recurring bouts of malaria, and he just could never get over the malaria, and it would just come up at these inopportune times. Others believe it's something to do with his eyes. We know that the Apostle Paul had challenges with his eyesight, and it could have been something to do with his eyes. But here's what we know. It was some kind of physical ailment that Paul felt, and it was a constant, right? And it tormented him, and everywhere he went, every time he went to serve God and to do some kind of ministry, it was with him. And this is what he says. Next verse, he says, 3 times I pleaded with God, take it away from me. Now you can just read that right casually in the English and be like, okay, he prayed on Monday and he prayed on Wednesday and he prayed on Friday. Like, okay, God, take it away. He didn't. Okay, next. No. This is what he's saying is this wasn't like a casual thing. These were like intense seasons of pleading and begging and prayer. And he's saying, hey, I went through 3 seasons of begging and pleading with God, pouring out my heart. Like, God, you have to do this kind of prayer. You know what I'm talking about? Not just like, hey, bless the food, let's have a good day. No. This is like everything he's got, pouring his heart out, asking God, heal me, God. I beg you, please take rid of this. Get rid of this. This was a desperation. And you got to imagine, like, we all bargain with God, right? You try to make these, like, imagine Paul, right? The bargaining power that Paul has. I mean, but Paul could have like, hey, man, he could have really bargained with God. And you know how we do this. God, well, I'll attend all the Easter gatherings, God, and I'll give more, or I'll serve, and I won't pick up another drink, or I'll quit smoking, God, or I'll never do this, and I promise to do this, and I'll always do this. And you do these bargaining things. And Paul is saying, man, 3 times I went into these intense seasons and I pleaded with God. And again, I just want to pause. If we just stopped right here, in the story, this should be encouraging to us. Because here is someone who God clearly loved, who God had called, who God knew his name, who knew everything about him, who God's hand was on, who did great things. Here was someone that God clearly loved. And God used in significant ways, and God said to him, nope. I mean, that should be encouraging to us. When you feel a no, like, hey, you're not alone. You're not alone. 3 times he says, I pleaded with God. And then look what he says. Next verse 8. But he, that's God. But God said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. Paul, no. But my grace is sufficient for you. I'm not going to give you what you asked for, but my grace is sufficient for you. And grace here, the context of this word grace in this sentence, is really just grace to take another step. It's just grace to get out of bed and to live the day. It's the ability to get through the day. It's to go to work and just endure one more day. It's to come home in the midst of the chaos and the unknown and just to endure, to keep going, no matter what, just to keep going. And so God says to Paul, who he loved, he says, no, I'm not going to remove this thorn in your flesh, this physical ailment. But I'm telling you what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you the strength to keep going forward. I'm going to give you the strength to keep going forward. And look what he says. This is terrible. He says, for my power is made perfect in weakness. My power is made perfect, which means mature or come to full fruition or on full display. My power is made perfect on full display in your weakness. Now guess what? None of us want to sign up for this. None of us want this, right? If there was a sign-up sheet in the back, like, all right, guys, who wants to have God's glory, God's power shown in your weakness, will sign up in the back. It'll be a blank piece of paper, right? None of you want that. You guys all want the end zone, right? You want to catch the touchdown pass in the end zone, or you want to round third base, right, and make it home. Or you want to be the first one across the finish line, right? You want the employee of the year, the salesperson of the year, the teacher of the year, right? That's what you want. No one wants to be the one that says, oh yeah, let's let my weakness show God. No, we want, hey God, how about my talents? How about my gifts? How about my opportunity? Those are great, God, but no, not this, right? No. Like we want to be you guys, we love the Oscars, they happen every year. We want to be the one that walks up there, like, oh, yeah, thank you, yeah. Yes, I want to thank my family, and thank you, and my producers, and you guys are awesome. And last but not least, let me just thank my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, right? That's what we want to do, right? We want to be the one on the stage, but Paul is saying, nope, God, your power is on full display, not when we're getting the prize, but in our weakness. Here's the good news about this. You don't get to choose. I don't get to choose. We don't get to choose, because if we did, none of us would choose this. I wouldn't choose this. You get this, right? I mean, all of us like Victor. Like, we like to see the celebrity, and we get, right, whatever. But it's a flash. You know who the people that I really admire? You know who the people that I want to emulate, the people that I want to follow? It's not the one that like, oh, wow, you caught the pass, or you won the race. And that's great, and that's cool for about 15 seconds. You know who I really want to emulate and who I really admire? Is the person that shows up day in and day out, and they're consistent, and they have integrity. And despite what I know is going on in their life, they show up and their character is intact, right? I mean, think about this, right? If you're married and you want to have a good marriage, what do? Right? You show up every day, right? You endure, right? You have integrity, you have character, you do the right thing, even when you don't feel like doing it. If you want to be a great parent, if you want to be the kind of parent that your kids actually like when they're out of the house and they actually want to come back and hang out to you, what do? Right? Every day, consistent deposits of love, right? Consistency, showing up every day, right? If we want to have a great church, what do? Like, woo, look at us. Like, no. Week in, week out, we just show up consistently. The love is consistent. The integrity is consistent. We do the right things. We make the right choice day in and day out. That's where the difference is made. God says, my power is made perfect. It's on full display in your weakness. And then look what he says. This guy's crazy. He says this, therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses so that Jesus' power may rest on me. Paul says, hey, I think God really shows off the best. I think God really shows off the best, not in my strengths, but in my weaknesses. Next one, 10. This is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Are you crazy, Paul? Who would say that? It's insane. For when I am weak, then I am strong. I delight in my weaknesses. I want to just make, as we kind of wrap these two stories up, I want to kind of bring them together, and I want to make just some quick observations that I see in these two stories, and I also have experienced in my own life, and then we're going to wrap up our time together. I want to just make some quick learnings, if you will, and we'll just throw them up on the screen. The first one is this. is sometimes a no is the best thing that can happen to you. Sometimes a no is the best thing that can happen. Now, you won't feel that in the immediate. You won't feel that in the moment. And in fact, you may never feel that. Sometimes you get perspective later on, but sometimes a no is the best thing that can happen to you. Another learning is this. We have permission to ask God to remove our thorns. In fact, if you have something, whether it's physical or some kind of situation in your life, I would encourage you to pour out your heart to God, to ask, to plead, to do what Paul did, right? To go into intense seasons of, God, would you please take this away from me? Or, God, would you please answer this prayer? God, please. We have permission, just like Paul, to ask God to remove our thorns. Third, God has permission to say no. God has permission to say no. And neither our standing with Him nor our faith requires a yes. In fact, I would say it takes more faith to endure a no than it does to acquire a yes. We're talking about the idea of a moment of faith versus a life of faith. Now, I'm going to just pick on some people real quick, okay? Maybe I'll get in trouble, that's fine. Right? Some of you grew up in churches or you grew up in places where you were taught, right, that you just need more faith, right? That you just got to have more. If you just would believe more or have more faith or give more or serve more, then God, right? It's like you earn God's yes, right? If you do enough, right, then you will earn the favor of God and earn God, yeah. You just need more faith, more of this, more of that, and then God will say yes. You can clearly see from Paul's example that that's not true. Right? God was going to say no to Paul regardless of his faith or his giving or his belief. Like, we do all of that. We have more faith and we give and we serve. We do all that as a result of God's love. We don't do that in order to earn God's love. Right? Moment of faith versus a life of faith. See, God's calling us to live a life of, hey, take the next step. Just take the step. Yeah, God said no. Yeah, I know it's hard. Just take the next step. Fourth one. God may choose to showcase His power on the stage of your weaknesses. It may never get better. It may never change. You may never be healed. But God gains a great deal of attention by demonstrating His strength in your weakness. It's this idea of sustaining grace. God is saying, hey, wherever you are, whatever you're going through, whatever your ailment, whatever your struggle, there's this idea of sustaining grace that will get you through it. Number 5, I'm going to pick up the pace. You can't experience God's sustaining grace while resisting His will. This is where the rub comes. To resist His will is to resist His grace. And if you've been unwilling to accept no for an answer, you are struggling to deal with the situation. You are struggling to deal with the situation in your own strength. You're trying to take matters into your own hands. Here's the biggest rub, I believe, when it comes to people who are far from God or are not sure about God. It's the one word. It's called control. Control. I like to be in control. Do you like to be in control? Yeah. Do you like to be the boss? Yeah. Just have kids, and then you'll learn that there's no such thing, right? Right. It's true, right? Amen? Yeah. Right? You realize that there's not control. But we all like to be in control. In fact, there's a dear friend of mine and my wife's who we have been praying for and having conversations with for years. And she is so smart and so educated and got so much together. And in her life, if you were to just kind of look at it from a distance, it's kind of all put together, right? It's the house with the fence around it and the porch swing and the lemonade out front and, her hair, Instagram looks like, it's just the greatest thing ever happened. And it's just her life just from a distance, right? Just looks like it's all put together. Now, we're close enough to them to know that's not true, right? We after years and years and years of trust, kind of have got through that barrier and know that. But if you were just if I threw her up here on the screen, you'd be like, whoa. And here's her rub. Okay, we've had this conversation over and over again. My wife's had this conversation over and over. It comes down to one thing. She is wanting to be in control of her life. She has a plan. She has this is what my life is going to do. This is what I want my life to be. And that is it. And right now, things seem to be going okay and decently in that direction. But the thing that keeps her, for coming to believe and to follow Jesus is this idea of control. She just wants to be in control of her own life. Now, some of you know that, right? Like you battle with that all the time. Maybe you even feel that this morning. You like to be in control. Give me the steering wheel, right? Give me the controller. I want to be in control of my life. But the reality, friends, is that you're not in control. I'm not in control. And there comes a time when all of us face the cold, hard reality, right, that it's so much bigger than us. There's so many things happening beyond our control, and whether it's family or job or money, and there's things that are all happening, and at some point, you can't control it. What do? You can't always get what you want. What do you do? Where do you turn? And I believe that Jesus is offering you, and he's offering me, saying, listen, stop fighting. Stop striving. Stop trying to do all of that. I mean, it's good. I'm glad. I mean, it doesn't mean just sit and do nothing, but just stop trying to do all this stuff on your own. Stop trying to be all of this stuff on your own. Just stop. I want to do life with you. If you would just hand me the steering wheel, if you would hand me the controller, I actually have a better plan. I actually have a better way. And I'm not saying it's going to be easy or perfect or you'll never have any speed bump, but I got a better plan for you. And this is the good news of Jesus. And it's available to you and to me. And all you need to do is just say, okay, God, that's it. I'm just going to give up control. I want to hand you the steering wheel. I want to give you the controller, God, and I just want to follow your plan. And some of you have discovered this in this room, and you for years, it's a constant battle, even daily. We're just like, okay, God, today, you're in control today, not me. You're in control today. Some of you, this is kind of your thing, right? You feel like you've hit a wall. You've been kind of on this journey, asking questions and seeking, and all of a sudden you came to this, boom, right? And it's this issue right here. It's this issue. Can I just pray for you right now? I just want to pray, and I want to just create a moment right here where you can talk to God quietly, where you're seated. And some of you, for the very first time, need to give God the steering wheel and to give him the controller. And stop trying to fight this thing, because you're exhausted. And I'm exhausted watching you. And some of you, you've done that, but you just need a refresh, just a reminder. They're like, okay, God, that's right, today, right? Because some of you aren't getting what you want, but I'm telling you, it's probably the best thing that ever happened to you. You can only stuff your face with so much cotton candy before you get sick. So God, I thank you for the men and women who are in this room right now. And God, I clearly know that just like James and John and just like Paul, these are men and women and students who you know their name, and you actually love them. And just like you did with Paul and just like you did with James and John, you have a plan for them. God, you want to use them to do things beyond just their life, to make an impact in this city, in this community, God. You want to use them, God, to be a blessing to other people. And God, we can clearly see from how you interacted with James and John and how you interacted with Paul that sometimes, God, things don't go like we want them to. They don't go according to our plan. But God, you never leave. You never leave your position as God. God, you're in control. Nothing here is a shock to you. You're not caught off guard. And God, you are leaning into us right now, God, with love and compassion. And you, God, whatever we're feeling or experiencing, God, you want to give us hope. And so, God, right now, as some people in this room are wrestling with this whole idea of control and doing their thing, God, I pray that they would say, hey, God, not my will, but yours be done. God, not what I want, not my plan, God, but I want to follow your plan, God. And I think there's some people here today for the very first time who want to say, yes, God, I want to give you control of my life. God, there's some of us in this room who've been following you for years, maybe even decades, and we just need to refresh today and say, God, hey, not my plan, God. I get distracted sometimes. I get caught sometimes doing my thing, but I just need to refresh today. God, not my plan, your plan. So God, as we just create a moment here, I pray that we can just do business with you, God. Open our hearts and ears to what you want to say to us.